Hello all, welcome to my next video here on my channel. Today we are going to be discussing my June wrap-up, and I do realize this is coming like almost 2 weeks into June, but I wanted to do it. I still wanted to get it done, and I want to film more wrap-ups for you guys because like I'm always doing the TBR jar. It's like I'm always good about the TBR jar and like my next month's reading, but I think I very rarely, like maybe twice, ever talked about the books that I actually did read in a month. And I was also very excited to do June's because June is the best reading month I have ever had. And when I say that, I read a total of 11 books in the month of June. I've never read that many books in a month. And part of me thinks it mostly has to do with the fact that I'm on summer vacation, so I've got more time to read. And honestly, I read a lot of like awesome books this month. I really felt like I had a very good selection of books this month, and I just went to town. So of those 11 books, 5 of them were physical books, 5 of them were ebooks on my Kindle, and 1 of them was an audiobook. And of those 11, 3 of them were mystery thrillers, 3 of them were fantasy, 2 of them were romanticies, 2 of them were strictly romance, and 1 was a self-help book. And then I actually did have 2 other half books read, one of which I never finished. I set it aside. I didn't DNF it, but I just set it aside. It's just a soft DNF. I'll get back to it eventually. And then the other one that I did end up finishing in the month of July, which I will talk about in July's wrap-up. So we're going to talk about the 11 books that I completely finished this month. Okay, also I realized for my star ratings, I had 2 3-star reads, I had 4 4-star reads, I had 3 5-star reads, and I had 2 books that I did not rate, and I'll talk about why I didn't rate them when we review them. So up first, I read The Alone Time by Elmar. In The Alone Time, we follow 2 sisters who spent 6 years out in the woods by themselves after a plane crash, and they spent 6 weeks out in the woods before they were found. And we follow the 2 sisters 25 years later as things start coming up about their story. And they start getting, well, everybody kind of knows who they are. It's like their story is public in regards to the fact that they were found after 6 weeks, that they were completely alone, that they survived. I think it was, 12. I don't remember if I said 6 or 12 weeks off the top of my head now. I think it was 12 weeks. Anyway, they spent a lot of time on their own out in the woods before they were found. And there's been a bunch of media attention for them, and just this book follows their story 25 years later. We see like how they're doing, how they're coping, how they're dealing with their current life. And we end up following because they start getting a little more media attention. There's a new individual that they didn't realize would end up having crossover in their life, and we start learning the truth about what actually happened during those 12 weeks that they were alone. This one I rated, it was one of my 4-star reads. I really did it. It was very solid. I didn't find any plot holes. I didn't find anything that like would not make it like a solid read. And so it's just, it held my attention. It was gripping, but like it was solid for me. 4 stars is a very solid rating for me. And there was, for 4 stars for me, it's like, it's not like they were like the best thing ever, but they also like weren't like missing anything in any way, if that makes sense. Up next, I read Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. I do apologize for the pronunciation of his name. This was my self-help book that I read, so I did not rate it, and I did not rate it because it is a self-help book. It's a nonfiction, or it's self-help nonfiction, whatever you want to call it. It's just like it pretty much helps us rethink like how we get through things, like times that we feel like we suffer emotionally. It helps us with like changing mindset and how to change how we feel in a certain moment, in the sake of like, for those of us who have a history of anxiety and self-doubt and self-sabotaging. It pretty much talked about how to help with those mindsets. And I didn't rate it, but in all honesty, if I did, it'd probably be pretty low in a way. Like, the first half was fine. It was great. I was liking where it was going, but like as it progressed, it started being more like religious and viewing of God, and that's not what I look for in a self-help book. And so it's just, I didn't take it too much to mind. Just I took what I needed from the book and just let the rest be. So that was that one. And then up next, we read the book What is Love by Jen Comfort. I read this on my Kindle, and so far, all of the books so far have been read on my Kindle. This was my first 5-star read of the month. I absolutely loved it. In What is Love, we follow Max and Teddy, who are rivals in the world of trivia. And what I absolutely loved about this is that the two of them are like polar opposites. You have Max, she's ADHD, she's very distractible, but like she doesn't put too much mind into a lot except for trivia. She learns very on the go, she's just juicy for knowledge. And then we have Teddy, he's a professor. He's very smart, he's very strategic, he's very like on the line. he follows the road, you know? And so what's really cool is that we have this polar opposite, and it becomes their relationship from rivals to helping each other out to eventually a romance. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I love the way that Jen Comfort wrote it. I loved the interactions between Max and Teddy, and because of course the main goal by the end is to defeat they're ranked 2 and 3 in trivia, and so they're working together to beat the overall leader in trivia. And so there's also like some twists and turns in it, which was really, really fun. I really enjoyed this book. I was living for it. I read this thing in 2 days. Not even. Like, I read this in 2 days, and then amongst reading this, I also read Don't Believe Everything You Think. It's like I was reading What is Love, took a break and I binged the entirety of Don't Believe Everything You Think, and then jumped back into it. And so within 2 days, it was done. Had me kicking my feet and all giggly, and I loved it. Up next, we read the first physical book of the month, and Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is the second unrated book. There's something about the fact that Agatha Christie and her work is such classic that I didn't know how to rate it. I was like afraid to rate it. I didn't want to rate it. There was something about it that it's like, I'm just gonna let this be and not put a rating on it, because it was so good. I was loving it, and it was giving me very much Clue vibes. Now, this came out before Clue, and because I was looking it up, because I'm like, this is reminding me so much of Clue, both like the game and the movie. And so what had happened, this had come out first, and the guy who created Clue was just very inspired by mysteries and thrillers, and so it wasn't inspired like solely on this book, but it's like he had a love of mysteries and thrillers in general, and just used the stuff that he read and watched to inspire the game and the movie. And so I loved this. I ate this up. I read this in a day it took me to read this. It's like on the shorter side. It's 240, actually it's 402. It's like there's like an extra chapter at the end or something. Okay, so because I forgot that this is actually part of the story, and so it is 247 pages. Literally took me a day. It's a fast read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's like I kept trying to guess it, and of course I never did. And so the ending was very good. It was very satisfying and very thought out, and I loved it. After that, on my Kindle, I read Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. It's the first book in the Knock 'Em Out series. I have not read the rest of the Knock 'Em Out series, and I have not bought the rest of the Knock 'Em Out series yet. I only just bought and read this one because I needed this one for book club, and so that's what I did. And I absolutely loved it. It was my next 5-star read of the month. I absolutely loved it. We follow Naomi and Knox. Naomi, who's running away from a wedding, and comes when her sister calls on her, says, I need help, and her sister ends up stealing from her and leaving her with her 11-year-old daughter, Waylay. And through this process, she meets Knox, who is one of we find out he's very involved in the town. And so, but he's also this big, arrogant, selfish jerk, and he's not the nicest. But we see him, in as much of a jerk as he is, he cares for he grows to care for both Naomi and Waylay, and it's their story, and I loved it. Had me giggling, kicking my feet. There's something about when the romance has me giggling, loving, kicking my feet, like this is the best romance ever kind of feeling. That's all it takes for me. It's great. I absolutely loved it. After that, I read Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. It is a 5-novella book. Technically, it's a prequel to Throne of Glass, but at the same time, you can either read it. It talks about you either read it first or like third or fourth. I decided to read it first, and some of the novellas I loved, some of them not so much. In all honesty, it averaged out to about a 3-star. I did thoroughly. I enjoyed it, but like they were just little novellas. Like I felt like they were just learning the stories and moving on. Like almost these little, because of course it's like there's assassins, and obviously the Assassin's Blade, our main character Selenia Sardathine, and we follow her through all of these different stories. They're almost like these tall tales of helping a healer, fighting pirates, and fighting this one, and going through this, and they were all broken up into these little stories. It was cute, but just like I said, there were some that I liked, there were some that I didn't, and I settled on a 3-star. I am so really excited to continue and officially start the Throne of Glass series. I do own Throne of Glass, and I will eventually get to them. Up next, I read A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. I rated this one a 4-star. We follow Freya, who is currently, at the start of the book, she's married, but it was more of a pre-matched wedding, and she's not too happy in her marriage. And so she ends up coming into the situation of her husband is talking to the Jarl of her world, and come to find out her husband learned some information about her, and the Jarl ended up putting Freya against his own son, Bjorn. And in act of survival, she generates her power of the gods. Now, she was taught to keep her power of the gods secret, and she ends up releasing it because the Jarl's son is also a child of a god, and he bears a flame-throwing axe. And so the Jarl ends up trying to the goal is to fulfill a prophecy where he takes it as the ownership of the Shield Maiden will make him king of Skaland, which is their world separated into different jarldoms, of which he is Jarl of one. And his goal, he then marries Freya. He does have a wife that he loves deeply, but he ends up marrying Freya as well to gain ownership of Freya, to have her to use in battle to become king. Ultimately, she ends up falling. Her and Bjorn have this little romance that goes on between them, but there's of course, conflict and mixed feelings because of the fact that it's like she's married, she has feelings for this guy while she's married to his dad. So it's very interesting. I absolutely loved it. Like I said, it was a 4-star, so it was a solid read for me. And I'm excited to see what comes of this. It's the first book in a series called Saga of the Unfated. And so, yeah, I had a good time reading this one. While I read this, I was listening to The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. And in The Book of Doors, we follow Cassie, who she works at a bookstore, and she ends up, when a patron of the bookstore ends up dying, he passes away while in the bookshop and leaves her 2 books. One of their favorite books is The Count of Monte Cristo, but then there's this other book called The Book of Doors that gets left. And so between her and her best friend, they discover about this Book of Doors, and come to find out the Book of Doors is part of a collection of magical books. And through this process, they meet other owners of magical books and get into all this drama and adventure in a way, and ends up being getting pulled into this big battle over the magic books. And so I found this very entertaining. I did rate it 4 stars. I found it very entertaining. I found it very enjoyable. I was amazed at the progression, and a lot of it kind of caught me off guard. It's like, oh my gosh, wait, what? So I had a very good time reading this one, and I enjoy reading books about books. It's kind of like, how do other people talk about books and see books, and the fact that it's like a collection of magical books, but there's also very dangerous books as well. And so interacting with a bunch of people who own these books and want to own the books, and just a wondrous slew of people that we interact with, and it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. After that, I rented, I don't have the physical book anymore, but I rented The Housemate is Watching from my local library because I thoroughly enjoyed the first 2 Housemates, The Housemate and The Housemaid Secrets. I read those through Kindle Unlimited back when I had it. And so when I heard that The Housemate is Watching was coming out and we were getting closer to its release date, I called up my local library and got on the list to borrow it. And so when it came in, I dropped my TBR to read it, and I feel like I rated it 3-star. I felt like with this one, it was, because I've read a number of Frida McFadden's. Like I said, I read both of the other 2 Housemaid books. I've read The Inmate, I've read the Ward D, and I feel like I've learned Frida McFadden's equation, I guess. I've figured out how she writes her books, and they're just the way that Frida goes about making sure that you don't know who it is. And of course, there's always a plot twist, because she makes you think it's this one person, but really it's the other person. And I've loved the way that she does it. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed Ward B and The Inmate. And I don't know if this was just because it was a sequel or what, but it was kind of lackluster for me in a way. It was good, solid, it was good. Like I said, I rated it 3-star. I'm not saying that it was a bad book, but I guess I'm familiar with being familiar with Housemaid's storyline, and the fact that it's called The Housemaid is Watching. Of course, this housemaid is going to have to come into the story at some point. But also at the other end, there are other events that go on that do surprise you. There was only one character that I felt like there was a small plot hole, but at the same time, I guess it was supposed to be just a side character who, yes, she was part of the story, but wasn't part of the main storyline, So I was kind of expecting more out of her, and when I didn't get it, I'm like, okay. But then, just through the stories, and then getting towards the end of the climax, and there was a small twist, but it's I didn't see it coming, but at the same time, it's oh, interesting. It wasn't like, for me, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, it was so-and-so. It was more of interesting. And of course it came full circle, because of course if you're gonna make a book in the Housemate series, like it's gotta come full circle in some way. And it does. But that was about it for me. So I got it done in 2 days. Fast read. It was great for what it was. Up next, I read Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I had initially read like 5 chapters back in like March, but I got distracted by my other books, and so I set it aside. And so I finally picked it back up in the month of June, and I absolutely loved it. This is a romantasy, and it's called Half a Soul because our main character, Dora, her name is Theodora, but she goes by Dora, ends up, a fairy comes and collects a debt that her mother made, and in attempting to take Dora's whole soul, he ends up only managing to get half of it. And because her mother had, I guess, sold Dora to this fairy, and he was coming to collect the debt. What the fairy didn't know, is that Dora had a very protective cousin who came and used scissors to cut him, I think it was like in his thigh or something, to get him away from her. So the fairy ends up leaving with half the soul, and Dora keeps these scissors on her, and just through the story you can tell that Dora feels everything like on a very low level. And so like nothing like offends her, nothing upsets her. It's kind of like she just kind of like, there's a very like, there's almost like a numbness to it, but like they've all learned to live with it. And so her cousin wants to go to London for the London season, because of course we do have a little bit of like the romance of the London season. Like if you've seen Bridgerton, it's very similar. You go to all these different balls and looks for a marriage, pretty much. And so, but her cousin wants to bring her along with her, and of course Dora's goal is just to stay in the background. Dora ends up coming to be in interactions with 2 men by the names of Elias and Albert. Elias is known as the Lord Sorcier, who is a very wide-known magician, and Albert is just his friend. He doesn't have any sort of like magical powers. It's just he's a normal human, and they're just friends. They come to find out they served in war together. There's a novella at the back called The Lord Sorcier, where we kind of like find out his and Albert's beginnings. And so Albert and Elias served in the war together, and have just been friends ever since. And so Elias ends up getting entangles with Dora, and the romance comes from Dora and Elias. And like Dora was unsure if it's something that could really happen, and Elias wasn't looking for a relationship either. Like if you know Bridgerton, like the first season, how like the Duke and Daphne set up a deal where she's getting tired of the setups while he doesn't want a partner, and so they kind of make this deal to get both of them out, get him out of the limelight of other girls, and for her just like makes the family happy, you know. It's similar. They make a deal because Elias doesn't want a relationship, but of course everybody still ogles at him wide-eyed, whereas Dora's just trying to stay out of trouble. And so they take on a number of dances, because of course then the goal is, I think they try setting Dora up with Albert first, and then they also just try to keep everybody away from Elias just because of his reputation. But the two of them, Elias and Dora, of course, just end up falling for each other, and it's really, really cute, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I had a good time with this a 4-star rating. I wasn't sure if it said that, but it was wholehearted joy, and I loved it. Very comfort read, very cozy read, and I loved it. And I even annotated it a little bit. I used a green highlighter to highlight some of the lines, just because I found like the relation to be like absolutely cute. I even did like little hearts and stars next to this one, because it was just, I loved Elias and Dora. They were precious. And last but not least, we finished off the month with Powerful by Lauren Roberts. Powerful is a little novella it takes place at the same time as Powerless. And pretty much because of course in Powerful we're following Peyton and Kai. Powerful, we're following Adina. Adina is Peyton's best friend. They lived in the slums together for 5 years before Peyton went to the trials. And so in here we're following Adina from when Peyton gets taken to the trials to pretty much the end of Powerless. And if you've read Powerless, you know what happens to Adina. Okay, I'm not going to ruin it for anybody, but I'm just saying, if you've read Powerless, you know what happens to Adina. And we follow her all the way through, and I'm edge of my seat. And we also follow her and this male character by the name of Makoto, who goes by Mac, and we follow their relationship. And they form what starts as Makoto comes and asks Adina for help, and they form this kind of like friendship bond that of course ends up growing into a romance. And I loved Makoto as a character. I absolutely loved him, and I found like I could see Adina much better here than I could in Powerless. I don't know if I wasn't paying attention as much, but there was something about I could see Adina better here in Powerful, and I got an absolute kick out of the two of them. I cried. I rated this a 5-star, guys. Now mind you, I rated Powerless 4, and this is a little novella. I rated this thing 5 stars. It was absolutely incredible. And of course I annotated it, and I think with this one I did purple. Yeah, I did a purple pen with my tabs. And Adina and Makoto were just so stinking cute. I loved them dearly, and I cried. And so we had to rate it a 5-star. Like, I couldn't give it anything lower. And so it was so much fun to read this. Another quick read. I think it took me like 2 days or something. 3 days. 2 days. It's like I read a little bit and then spent a full day on it, and then a little bit. So I finished the month off strong, and that is everything, all 11 books that I read in June. Like I said, I typically read an average of 7, most of them being audiobooks. I guess I had so much time in June that I got so much done, and I had so much fun doing it. And I'm already enjoying July's, and so of course I'm going to try to do July's wrap up later, early August. And so thank you for joining me and listening to me talk about all of my books in the month of June. Honestly, let's see, if I had to pick a favorite book of the month of June, I think we're gonna go with Powerful. Yeah, I think Powerful was my favorite book the month of June, followed slowly by Things We Never Got Over. Very close second. There's just something about these romances that I absolutely loved, and so I've been enjoying reading romance more. If you followed me since the beginning, you'll know like fantasy has always been my favorite genre. I love fantasy. I love exploring new worlds. Like, my favorite series of all time are Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. Of course, I read those growing up. Those are the only series that I've held on to since my childhood, and they're fantasy and dystopian, and I absolutely love those. But lately, this past year, I've been getting really into romance. Like, I've always loved romantasy. Romantasy has always been like top tier for me. But I've also noticed, like, because of romantasy, but like with Things We Never Got Over, that's just a pure romance. And there was this 5-star. My other two 5 stars were just pure romances. I've really started enjoying reading romance, and just I'm a sucker for romance. I'm a true romantic, and I've really been enjoying the romance that I've been reading this year. And so I'm excited to continue reading fantasy and romance and combination. And so thank you guys so much for joining me for this video. Please like the video, leave a comment of if you've read any of these books and possibly what your favorite. I want to know what you enjoyed reading in the month of June. And don't forget to subscribe if you have not already. And again, thank you so much for joining me. and I'll see you in the next video.